very, very appropriate. I'm Leeann Martin, and I am here to talk about the World Series of Poker because I got to be in the World Series of Poker in June of 2025. This had been a bucket list item of both mine and my husband's for quite some time. And in 2025, we had some health challenges and just thought to ourselves, if not now, when? You know, we're not getting younger, we're not getting healthier, and we have the money, so let's go do it. We did go to the seniors event at the World Series of Poker because it's a lot cheaper than the main event. It was $1,000 buy-in, which was the most I've ever paid for a buy-in for poker. Probably the most I ever will pay for a buy-in for poker. And there were 12-ish of our friends. We all went out together. We had a group chat going, and we went, nearly all of us. Nearly all of us played. I think one of our friends was 49, and you have to be 50 to play in the seniors event. So she played in a lot of other small games while the rest of us played the seniors event. And one of our friends decided she was going to play in the super seniors event because you could play in it if you're 60. And she thought there might be slightly fewer players. So we get there, and I was just terrified on day one because this is the most money I've ever paid to play poker, and I considered myself kind of the weak link in our group of poker friends. So I said to myself, I'm not going to play a single hand during the first blind level, which is 1 hour. Well, that went out the window on the third hand when I looked down at a really great hand that the blind wasn't raised on. So I played, and I ended up with a full house. I started out with ace 10, ended up with tens full of aces, and I had a fella just betting into me. So I kept calling. I even raised at one point, and he thought for a while, called my raise. I flipped over my full house, and the look on this man's face was hysterical because he could not believe that a woman had beaten him. I was the only woman at the table. There were not a lot of women playing in this game, but that really helped me set a persona, and they were all terrified of me. And when they're scared of you, it's so much easier to play. One of the nice things about playing in the seniors event is poker players in the World Series can be very, very aggressive. But in the seniors event, they're a lot less aggressive, a lot more patience, and that works really well with my style of play. Although I did get to play with the youngest player in the seniors event because that day was his 50th birthday. And he, true to the form, being one of the youngest ones, was one of the more aggressive players. But it did not serve him all that well. So we played. I'm looking at my notes here. We played for, what was it? I think we played for like 11 hours because we played from noon to 11 p.m. And one of the most surreal moments was we played the last blind level, and they brought out all these plastic bags that said, bag up your chips. And you bagged up all the chips you had. You wrote the amount that was supposed to be in there and your name across the bag. And they just took them and put them in a safe someplace. So the next morning you come and your chips are there for you unbag your chips the next morning. You just go to your spot and your bag is there and you unbag them yourself so that you can confirm that everything is kosher. So I bagged my chips, and one of the people at the table said, if you've not played in the World Series of Poker before, or if you've not gotten to this point in the World Series of Poker before, snap a picture. And I did. I snapped a picture of that bag of chips that I was bagging up. Came in the next morning, and I swear to you, I was more nervous because I had made it that far. And by this time, of the dozen or so people, there were 3 of us left. One of whom was left because he had rebought the day before. So, 3 of us from that group are left playing. And I was really, really nervous by that time. And there was a lot more moving of tables. As people would bust out, they would combine tables and combine tables. And on that first day, I don't think I moved at all. Other players came to the table, but I didn't move. On the second day, I moved around a lot. I think I moved like 4 times maybe, as they continued to combine tables. Our friend who rebought but made it to the second day, he busted out before the first break. At the first break, they announced, if you're still playing, you're in the money. That was a special, special moment. In fact, weirdly enough, I am getting goosebumps talking about being in the money. And my other friend was still playing, and so both of us made the money, which essentially you double your money if you make it to that point where you're in the money. At that point, it becomes kind of about staying in, about acquiring chips slowly, and about leveling up in the money. Now, I'm sitting there with one dude who keeps saying, I don't know why people are talking about leveling up. Leveling up doesn't mean anything. You got to win. And you can't win by worrying about whether or not you're going to make it to the next level. The problem with his thoughts on this are, if you don't make it to the next level, you're not going to win. And true to his word, he played very aggressively, and he was out within 15 minutes of his statements that you had to, you had to win, not worry about leveling up. So we keep playing, and shortly after the break, my friend who had also made the money went out. And I mean very shortly after. So I was the sole survivor, and I was nervous, but I just kept playing and playing and playing. And at one point, I'm very proud of this, I was 4th in chips. Now, there were still like, I don't know, 1,000 people playing, and I was 4th in chips. And all of my friends who were on the group chat were like, Leeann is 4th in chips. Leeann is 4th in chips. Look at this. My husband, who had long since busted out and was off playing blackjack or craps or something, he looks down and he's like, hey, she's 4th in chips. So then all the people that he was gambling with were like, hey, keep checking. Where is she? How is she doing now? So that was kind of funny to be 4th in chips. And that was pretty exciting when I realized it. So we kept playing. And one of the coolest moments on the second day for me, because evidently little things mean a lot, was when they brought me a tray and went, put $100,000 worth of chips in this tray. We're gonna chip you up so you don't have quite so many chips. And so they brought me and I put 100,000 in, and they were like, you know what? Here's another tray. Do another 100,000. And not everybody at the table got to do that. So I got like $200,000 in like slightly bigger chips. Although we did not reach the point where we were playing with value chips so big that you get the placards. They were still just regular chips. So did that, made it all the way through to the end, bagged up my chips, took a picture of my bag again. I determined every time I get to bag chips, I'm going to take a picture of that. Day 3 starts, and I go to my assigned table, and I sit down in my assigned chair and I look to my right, and there is Scotty Wynn. Now, for those of you who play poker, you probably know who he is. He was a big tournament player. He's been playing poker probably for 40 years, but he was really big about 15, 20 years ago, and he's still pretty big. He's still a big winner, and it was really exciting to me to be sitting next to Scotty Wynn. The one funny thing is my friends all came that morning to kind of congratulate me on making day 3 and take some pictures of me at the table, and they were all just snapping away. And Scotty's buddy, Mike Matisow, who is also a poker player, came over to him and was talking to him, and he said to Scotty, those people are taking an awful lot of pictures of you. Do you want me to go tell them to stop? And Scotty looked at him and went, those are her friends. They're taking pictures of her. Leave them alone. So that I thought was kind of a funny moment. During this third day, there was this one player who was kind of short-stacked. And every time I was the big blind, he was either the cutoff or the dealer. Every time I was the big blind, he would push all in. And I would just look down at my cards and fold. And it was frustrating, but I've played with these kind of people, and I was just waiting. So eventually, he goes all in, and I look down at queens. And I, of course, called him instantly, and he flips over his 7-2 offsuit, which I knew that he was just doing it because he thought he could push me off. And of course my queens held, and I took all of his money, and he left in shame. And Scotty turned to me and said, that wasn't right. That he kept doing that to you specifically just wasn't right. Because I was the only woman at the table at that point. So, you know, he thought that was bad. What's interesting is he was replaced by a woman, and we were the last 2 women still playing. So eventually, I take that woman out. Yes, the last woman, the next to the last woman was taken out by the last woman. So I was the last woman standing in that tournament, and I was getting really, really, really short-stacked. So I looked down, and I had 7-10, and this really aggressive guy who'd been playing pretty aggressively bets enough to put me all in, and I just went, I'm all in. And he called, and he had ace-king, I'm pretty sure. And the flop came down 7-17. And again, just like the first guy, his face was just like, and he later commented, she called me with 7-10. She went all in with 7-10. But that also changed my table reputation to somebody who would gamble, which can be a good reputation to have, because if you're a really tight player, which I tend to be, once they think you're playing stupid hands, then they'll call your hands when you've got kings, and they thought, oh, she's going to have 7-10 again. So we continue to play, and I start amassing chips, and I'm somewhere in the middle of the pack chip-wise, but blinds are going up. Blinds are getting higher and higher and higher. And I look down at pocket nines, and I raised. At the time, I think the blinds were 50 and 100,000, and I raised it to 400,000. And it gets around to this guy who is just this super aggressive player who's, I'm the winningest cash game player in the history of the World Series of Poker, which is weird because I didn't think the World Series of Poker had cash games, but whatever. So he's been bragging a lot, and he goes, raise to 300,000, and the dealer had to tell him, She already raised to 400,000, but you said raise. He's like, well, I guess I have to make it 8. And so clearly he screwed up. So I took that as a cue, and I went all in with my pocket 9s. And he didn't even think about it for a second before he called. And he flips over King Jack not suited. And I'm like, that's a weird call when your raise was a mistake anyway. And he basically, I had enough money that I was going to cripple him if I won. And the flop came with nothing. It was, my 9s were holding, and I was, then the jack comes. The jack comes on the turn, and so the only thing that'll help me on the river is a 9, which I did not get. And so I was out 42nd of 7,575 entrants. I was the 42nd player to go out, and I was the last woman standing. And we were literally only about an hour from the end of day 3. And honestly, I looked at the amounts. Had I won that hand, I would have been either 2nd or 3rd in chips. So I definitely would have made it to day 4. And I most likely would have made the final table because I would have had enough money to just fold to the final table. I found out later that on day 4, they got down to the final table after playing for only 3 hours. So I definitely would have made it to the final table. But that was not meant to be. Now, Scotty actually was still playing when I left, but he literally went out 2 people after me. So I went out, somebody else went out, then Scotty went out. So I feel pretty good. I kept up with the pros pretty well. Last woman standing. And, you know, people are like, so you're going back again in 2026. The 2026 game is in about 20 days is when the 2026 senior event in the World Series of Poker comes up. And honestly, I thought about it. I had such a good experience. I really don't think I can ever recreate that. And so I just didn't want to ruin the high that you get from doing that well in the World Series of Poker and just taking out person after person and winning hand after hand. You know, as I mentioned at the start of this, it was on my bucket list. And a bucket list event can't go better than this did. The only way it could have gone better is if I'd won the whole thing. But that wasn't in the cards, and that would have been the fluke of a lifetime had I won. It would have even been a fluke if I'd made the final table. And I honestly believe most of my friends were flying out like the day before the final table played, because they were assuming, I'm not going to make the final table, and if I do, I'll just change my flight. I have a feeling that if I'd made the final table, most of my friends would have changed their flights and stayed for the final table as well. At least, I know for a fact 2 of them would have. Because one of my friends was so excited for me, you would have thought that she was the one who was working in day 3 in the World Series of Poker, because she was incredibly excited. That is the story of playing the seniors event at the World Series of Poker. Honestly, if I had gone much further, probably would have stayed and bought into the main event, because, you know, once you get a taste, it's just like that intermittent reinforcement in your psychology class, where, you know, if I hit the little bar 3 times, I get a food pellet. If I hit the little bar 10 times, I get a food. So I just got to keep hitting that bar to try to get that food pellet. But I didn't win quite enough that I was comfortable doing that. So that is the end. And I do need to show you what my husband dealt me, because I think it's pretty hilarious that he didn't check the deck and he dealt me a joker. But I consider that, that's going to be my wild card, so I'm 4 to a straight. Shuffle up and deal, everybody, because I'm all in.